Hi there. Hello, everyone. The best pronunciation of my name in a while. Thank you for this. It is great to follow up on such amazing discussions that took place today. All of them were great. All of them unavoidably affected by what COVID has created for all us. It is crazy how this new reality has created such diverse challenges to industries that seem completely uncorrelated. And today, in this panel, we are discussing with a company of four amazing individuals the effect of COVID on the safety and the quality of governance in our cities, some of them being a bit smarter. Quick introduction from myself. I'm going to keep it quick. I'm Fotis, CEO of Novoville. My background is on signal analytics, and Novoville is a company that generates citizen engagement by creating better digital services for local councils. In the context of today's panel, it's probably worth mentioning that we are doing work with a few UK councils on managing befriending activities, which have become very important because of how isolated some people have been lately. Most importantly, today with me, I have a panel that touches upon the concept of smart cities in a variety of ways. People from the public sector, but also from companies and organizations that try to help the public sector. So today we have with us Nikolaï, that has served as, he is serving as a Minister of Digitalization in Norway since January 2019. He's also a member of the United Nations Secretary High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, and he has a diverse political background. He's done other things in politics in Norway, obviously, with Mr. Astrup having served from January 2018 to January 2019 as a Minister of International Development. Next to him, we have Mr. Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands Combined Authority. He has been there since 2017. Notably, Mr. Street, prior to this and between 2007 and 2016, he was the Managing Director of John Lewis with great success. And so he knows both sides of the story, the corporate and the public sector as well. So we expect him to be, his opinion to be very interesting today. The lady of the panel is Anna Jordan. She's Head of Operations at Alchera Technologies. And she's responsible there for the commercial and technical delivery of this dynamic business. She's a scientist, and she has worked in research physics in France before transferring her skills to some lucky machine learning startups. And also with us today is Stefan, Director of Place at FutureGov. Mr. Webb is responsible for the corresponding new business engagement for Place. This includes planning, development, economic development, climate emergency, and all sorts of other things, including smart cities. And we have another diverse background here, as Steph has worked in roles across local and regional government, innovation agencies, and charities. So let's use this expertise. I can kick off the discussion with some stories that are hopefully practical and measurable for the audience from our panelists. I would like to start with Anna. Anna, can you please give us an example of a technological initiative or a product that has improved or you feel will improve in the future the safety of our cities in these troublesome times of COVID? I know, for example, you guys have been working on dynamic social care, for example, as you told us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for the intro. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you to the organizers for having me. So maybe quickly I'll give a brief intro to Alchera and what we do, and then dive into that example that you mentioned. So at Alchera, we're trying to create data-driven infrastructure. And what we mean by that is trying to enable every member of every team trying to run a service, whether it be a hospital, an airport, a public transport service, or a social care team, to access the data that they need in real time to be able to then make those important decisions. And what we've seen is as soon as you can start to give that data and hand that data over to those teams who need it, we can start to work closely across different sectors and across different sections of organizations in order to respond to some of these big changes. and use machine learning and AI to help kind of make some of the these large swathes of data that we have around us more simple to understand. And so while this was important before COVID with things like air quality, public transport, planning, when you come into this new era of COVID, being able to respond to these daily changes and the way in which our cities are evolving on a day-by-day basis with new regulations coming in, with new emergency travel, the Emergency Active Travel Fund, for example, and many other initiatives in between, it becomes more and more important to be able to respond dynamically. And what we understand by that is being able to provide the dynamic access to this real-time information to be able to understand and respond better. So when you mentioned kind of dynamic social care, we think of being able to provide information around, for example, a local bus service, around the availability of disabled spots or the realistic timetables given the updated travel and network congestion dynamics to let people move around safely and with kind of as much information as they can be given around this kind of dynamic and changing landscape.
Thank you, Anna. Mr. Street, it is great to have you with us. Same question, really. Can you please elaborate on things happening in the West Midlands in the past few months? We have read about your work with 5G, for example, but I'm sure there is more there.
Yes, with pleasure. So nice to be on the panel, and you're quite right. We're bound to talk about 5G at some point because we don't miss any opportunity. Just to remind everybody that the West Midlands was chosen as the national trial for a large-scale testbed for 5G. But I actually wanted to come to two, I think, very practical things in answering this question. And actually, the first one picks up what Anna has just. I didn't know what Anna was going to say, but it follows on very nicely. So one of the areas we have direct responsibility for, of course, is public transport. And there's a real issue about returning to work. Is public transport safe to go on? I've spent so many times going on the telly and the radio telling citizens across the West Midlands, yes, it's safe to go on it. You will be able to socially distance on our public transport. And one of the reasons for that is what I think is a very simple technological innovation, but we did it. And that's for our metro system. We have installed automated passenger counters on each of our trams, so they're not big technology there, but they know exactly how many people are on, so how full it is, whether you can socially distance. But of course, the key has been then to feed that information back real time to our customers through the public information systems. So you can decide if you wish to travel on a tram, depending on the ability to socially distance. Really practical, small thing, but it has definitely kept people safe and given them confidence of returning to the city. And then the second example I'd choose just very quickly, it's slightly different, but I think it's actually really relevant. One of the whole issues here, as the city has changed, or cities have changed through COVID, has been how good are digital skills. Not good enough is the answer in most British cities. And so we have been trialling what we call a digital boot camp as part of the National Retraining Scheme, where simply people falling out of work, pre-COVID this was, without digital skills, they go through intensive training in our boot camp. And then lo and behold, today, pilot sort of pathfinder that we've been running is going to be established as a national system in terms of the skills response to the pandemic that is announced today. So that was a nice moment for West Midlands to learn that it was the successful pilot of what's now been adopted nationally.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lindbold, we really appreciate your presence today. You are bringing the perspective of Norway, and that's very useful. I know you have done work on projecting the variation for the demand of public services and transport as well. Can you please elaborate on what has been happening in Norway in a similar way?
Well, in Norway, I think we have. Let me just start by saying that I agree with what Anna said, that there is a huge possibility of using AI, for instance, and 5G and IoT, which together combine as a perfect storm in many ways to give real-time services to people, improve services. And we have been working on that for quite some time. But of course, COVID has speeded up things quite a bit, I would say. And we're seeing that things that were on trial as public services is now sort of rolled out at a fast pace, which I think is good. For instance, video consultations with the healthcare we had about 142 only a day before the 12th of March. Now we are at 4,000 or 5,000 a day. So people are really embracing the new opportunities to interact digitally, and in order to avoid going into a hospital, for instance, for a consultation where physical presence is not needed. We're also seeing trends like cash, where Norway was, I think, the lowest cash transactions in the OECD before COVID. Now we're down to 3% of all transactions being cash. So there's a fast-paced movement, I think, going on. In order to be able to make the use of these new technologies, we need data, and it all feeds on data, really. So making public data sets available to those entrepreneurs, to people who can really make some improve services based on those data sets, I think is very important. So we've been working quite a lot on making more data sets available, but also cooperating between different state actors and municipal actors to make sure that we get seamless services across government levels. So, and in order for that to happen, we need to share more data among ourselves, which is a huge challenge and a change of mindset, really, for many of the public sector actors out there. So this is ongoing projects, and we're launching now a new program to team up startups with the public sector to make sure that the demands of the public sector is met by also the startups, because now traditionally the tenders go to the big companies. I think that we need to involve also the small entrepreneurs, and I think that's good also for the big companies, that they are challenged with new ideas, fresh ideas from smaller companies that have a lot to contribute when it comes to public services, but also to business in general in Norway and of course around the world.
Thank you very much. Stefan, can you share with us the highlights of your COVID months as well? Especially the work on personal protective equipment that you launched with the Council of Camden, if I remember well. We cannot hear you, Stefan. You're probably muted. No, we cannot hear you yet. Okay, I'll move to the next question, and he can join us later. Moving on, I would like to focus on something that might not feel that obvious. We discussed briefly safety in our cities in terms of how we process data to create better version of the society. But how about safety in your very own organizations? I would like to start with Mr. Street. How did COVID affect your operations in terms of organizing working from home? Your services, and we all know, are often citizen-facing, and typically this is in need of front desks, call centers. So in other words, my question is, how ready were you to deal with remote colleagues and remote demand, if that makes sense?
Question is it ready the last 6 weeks? It's gone pretty well. I think it's actually proven that technology we have has been up to scratch. I just want to say about two things. I think make it more specific. Two things I think we've done well, and neither of them are frankly really cutting edge in terms of technology, but I both think both of them in terms of ideas have broken new ground. And the first one is really this question that everyone has faced. From home, how they manage their own mental health. And we all know that this has been really, really challenging. I'm quite proud of it. That's not an inappropriate emotion. Is the whole question of we made it available for our own across the region. And this was basically taking all.
Sorry for this. We had some issues. Mr. Lindholm, on the same topic, how did you give vulnerable and high-risk people better information as to when and where to move around the cities in Norway during the past few months?
Well, I think the problem with COVID is, of course, that there's a lag between infection and detection. So it's very difficult to give real-time information to people as to where it's dangerous to be or where you are at risk of getting infected, because you will know only maybe a week later that okay, this was a hotspot and we didn't actually know. So that's the difficulty. And I don't think necessarily technology can solve that yet. We developed an app to be able to trace where people got infected. It was not a success. I have to say also there were some privacy issues with that app. So we actually now terminated that project. And of course we had 2 weeks to do it in March. We did it really quickly. And it was difficult because it was both Bluetooth and GPS positioning. So that was a tricky one, I think, and we didn't succeed on that. But I think that's how you need to work as well. You need to try new things, and you need to sort of test those boundaries, and then you have to terminate if it doesn't work out. So we're now working on whether or not we should develop a new sort of application that can be able to trace your close contacts when you are infected. So it's possible to easier, at least to trace those who should be notified if you are unlucky and get COVID-19. So, but if your question is also how do we change the way we work, I think I'm in charge of 356 municipalities, and they all manage this quite differently. Some of our cities are, of course, big cities, but some municipalities have only maybe a few hundred or a few thousand inhabitants, and some of those were struck by COVID as well, and it's difficult to cope when you have limited resources. So there's a need for national coordination, I think, and we have tried to provide that, and also openness about the risks, and having an open and frankful communication with your citizens, I think, is key to building trust. So also being open about the insecurities, about what to do and what not to do, and that we are not sure of all the answers to COVID. How to deal with it. But so far, at least, we've managed, I think, quite well to adapt to the new circumstances, which sadly, I think, will be with us for quite some time.
Yeah, that's true. That is sad. Stefan, now that we have you back with us, can you share with us the perspective of a company when it comes to remote working? I guess working remotely was a breeze for FutureGov, but what about your clients?
Well, yes, for sure. So helpfully or unhelpfully, my first day at FutureGov was as we entered national lockdown, and I can attest that it's a very good organisation to work for digitally, as that's the only way I've engaged. And as you mentioned, we've been working quite flexibly for a number of years, but clearly with different clients, there are different needs and different levels of digital kind of maturity and capability. One particular project that I'd flag is where we're working with 7 cities across Europe as part of Bloomberg Philanthropies. And again, this project was meant to kick off face-to-face, as it were, with our researchers and designers working with the cities. However, we had to pivot kind of overnight to a kind of all digital delivery mode. And I've been astonished with the creativity of some of my colleagues using tools in particular, such as Miro, to kind of guide people through design research, to build empathy with our clients, and to understand these cities, to immerse ourselves in these places, even if it's only digitally. And I think whilst the face-to-face contact would be good, empathizing with clients, empathizing with people can be done digitally. It just requires creativity and different approaches, which we'll be able to build on now, even post-COVID, because I think there will then be opportunities to reach out more, to engage more, where we might not previously have been able to travel the distances involved.
Okay, thank you. Anna, Same question for you, if you have a story to share about how collaboration has affected any aspects of safety in your company. But I would like to add to this, does it mean the fact that we are working remotely and everybody stays at home, does it mean really we need to collect data differently now that everyone is staying at home? We cannot
Stefan,
hear you. We can now. You're back.
Oh, brilliant. What I was going to say is that just like Stefan, I think from an organizational perspective, we were already very functional as a remote team. We're a software organization, so that kind of flew by without much of an impact. But on the second part of your question around how people's behavior has changed, and how that impacts kind of downstream what we see as how real-time data and how data-driven transport and general management of cities can work differently. Well, I think it actually reflects something that the minister mentioned, which is that we've seen this kind of accelerated pace of adoption of some of these technologies and an accelerated pace or demand, in fact, for this visibility. And so when we think around, okay, now we've got this huge portion of the workforce who were commuting previously and are now working from home, how can we understand that, and how can we understand the impacts of that shift on how we schedule our bus services, or how we manage the fact that now on any given street you've got 15 times more grocery deliveries or shopping trips that take place in personal cars instead of using public transport because people feel more comfortable that way at the moment or in the last few months. And so for us, we've actually seen this period as one where we've seen increased demand for the kind of services that we can help provide, because when you need to have visibility of your assets, actually the reality is for most local authorities that they collect a huge volume of data. You have a huge number of legacy systems that exist from kind of local authorities' vehicle fleets to under-road loops to some really kind of old school kind of bits of hardware that you find around a space. And what can be very valuable is then how can we repurpose some of these? How can we understand some of these fragmented and siloed sources using some modern technology, using AI and machine learning to then gain some insights that let us appreciate this new shift in the way that the world moves, and appreciate that shift without having seen it before, which is this important thing that you get when you start to use machine learning, is that you can respond to scenarios that you've not seen before based on how different scenarios have responded in the past. So for us, the shift to working from home and the shift to how people are moving around has been a really interesting one, and one where we've seen the kind of validation approach of trying to use data to make better decisions around how we operate our cities.
Okay, thank you again. I have one more question for you before we move to the questions that the audience is sending. There are several surveys in the UK that show that 90% of citizens believe that the response of their cities for services that relate to either healthcare, finances and education and childcare, these services are going to become more important in the months to follow. Given the fact that this is something very imminent, something that people need immediately, are we given here an opportunity for a new form of urban governance, design smart cities in a whole different way? I would like to start with Mr. Lindball. My question is really, can we ensure, for example, that smart city technologies are accessible and usable by all citizens? Are we taking into account these things, especially in Norway?
I think you mean Mr. Astrup. Yes, I think smart city technology is here to stay. I think it will accelerate in the months and years to come. I think COVID has helped give us what was previously scenario thinking, a practical and real value, because now we can actually simulate what would happen if people would stay at home and work at home for periods of time. We can see what happens with the public transportation systems. We can see how people are using bikes a lot more often. We can also maybe be better at predicting what kind of technological tools and innovations do we need in order to realize true smart cities. And let me just take one of them that is evident also from this meeting, is that we need proper digital infrastructure. So we need to make sure that the 5G network that Andy is working on is not something that is long into the future, but it needs to be here now. Because in order to have real-time analysis of what's happening in the city and smart city tools and applications, we need real-time data, which we will only get from 5G. So rolling out digital infrastructure at a much faster pace all over Europe and the world, I think, is important. And let's remember, it's only 3.5 billion of us in the world that's connected today. So most cities don't have this option at all, but we need, at least in our countries, to do this. And we've been working a lot on our public, or not our public, but our digital infrastructure in Norway. So now 90% of our households have access to high-speed internet, but that's not enough because it needs to be 100%. And of course, with a country with only 5 million people, the size of Germany, it's difficult to build that kind of infrastructure. But it needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly in order to realize all the potential gains from smart city tools that we know are there, but that we have just started scratching the surface in terms of making use of for the future.
Thank you. Actually, that's a perfect bridge, Stefan. Do you think this new set of circumstances, as the minister just said, creates the need for increasing the quality of our digital infrastructure?
So I think the conditions of COVID have suggested a number of things which data can assist. So one of the things that we've observed most strongly is where actually it's about people coming together. It's about multidisciplinary teams working together in a crisis to solve and meet citizen needs. So we did a project working closely with Camden Council as COVID struck, where we worked alongside council officers from many different departments to better understand the needs of residents and requests that were coming into the council and other public institutions, and actually getting that kind of data and organising it in a way that allowed the council to triage, as it were, the needs that they were getting and work with different providers, not just within the council, but across Camden to meet those needs and ensure that they were delivered in a high quality way is the more important trend, I think. Yes, for sure, data can and should inform some of those decisions, but in many cases we need to kind of fix the plumbing of that public digital infrastructure. So we're also involved in a project with North East London NHS Trust, where frankly they were spending an awful lot of time filling in forms about the amount of PPE stocks that they had, and these were very badly designed forms that meant that people who could be spending their time much better elsewhere were spending their time filling in forms. So designing bureaucracy well so that the data that was needed and is needed, that's as much as part of the challenge. So I'd strike a slightly contrary note, I guess, in that, you know, whilst data is important, it's about data to inform decisions, and it's those decisions that are made by public institutions that need a new form of governance around them, perhaps. So where there is increasing awareness now in the public of how data about individuals is used, I think we need a new kind of social contract of sorts with members of the public to actually understand what the smart city is and what it might be. Clearly, before the pandemic struck, Google and their Sidewalk Labs experiment was kind of paused, and I think that shows, again, as many others have said, the need for kind of trust in that public digital infrastructure. So how might we have kind of citizens' assemblies almost to engage with how public institutions are using data and help kind of co-design some of the solutions that builds the trust in the solutions we might need. And the other slightly contrary point I might make is clearly data can help inform decisions, but Nobody really knows what the answer is going to be. No amount of artificial intelligence and machine learning can actually predict, will our cities be slightly hollowed out? Will there be a significant growth in suburbs? And I think new forms of governance and of ways of working that help us deal with this uncertainty and help deal with that transition. And for sure, data can inform that, but how different departments, different skills work together to use and interpret that data and provide the leadership for places, I think is going to be very important as well.
Thank you. Mr. Street, are regional governments doing their part so that governance migrates to a more digital version, something completely new?
My apologies, Fotis. I didn't hear the question you asked. My apologies. You'll have to repeat it.
My question is really whether regional governments, like the combined authority of the West Midlands, are doing their part right now so that governance migrates to a more digital version.
Yes. So I think there's probably two examples I'd give to answer that very positively. And the first one builds on what you just heard, actually. But before we come to that, can I just apologise for dropping out? Given the subject, it's really very embarrassing. But so everyone knows, I'm not in Birmingham today with our wonderful 5G network. I'm in London. I said to my PA, I'm sure the internet will be fine there. And it's let me down. So there's a lesson there. Don't leave Birmingham. Right. OK. So the two examples I would choose, first of all, we actually have done a whole piece around citizens panel on what is required from the recovery phase. And I'm not in any way suggesting that politicians completely abdicate or delegate responsibility, but we wanted, given what a seismic event this is, to find out what people genuinely were thinking. So we did that all digitally in terms of the input being shared digitally and in terms of the event actually occurring digitally, and actually have a really good feel from a group that represented the region in terms of the demography on what they think the priorities are. So it's been really actually very formative in terms of that piece. And the second piece, it's not so much governance, but it's certainly around the region playing its role in terms of keeping citizens informed about what's going on. And we have moved to a weekly regional press conference. We have all of the big regional journalists on it. Again, is all done digitally. And if you told me before the pandemic, we would get 60 journalists a week in the same place, leaders from the health service, the police service, the political services, all dealing with the same issue at exactly the same time, I would say to you, no way would that have happened. But actually out of adversity, by using not advanced technology, but at least deploying what we've got, we have brought everyone together in that way. So I think very practical examples of how we've moved forward.
Thank you. And Anna, I'm planning to ask you something that one of a person from the audience has asked as well. Can we, in terms of creating better governance, can we, for example, finally use data to improve our commute when we go back to normal? Is there now a new normal we can use so that next time I'm traveling around London or the West Midlands, things are a bit quicker?
I mean, the utopia we're all hunting for. I think, to seize on the theme of kind of opportunity around here and around that question, maybe some of the things that have kind of already been spoken to somewhat by my fellow panelists are around, I think, three main themes. So certainly for return to the commute and kind of themes that have been picked up by both Norway, the West Midlands clearly, and some of the Stefan, you mentioned you're looking at across Europe, is this concept of openness and being able to have a certain openness that you have and a certain ability to share it. And so you think of tools like CityMap Assist, which are based upon London making some of their open data platform available. We have the last open data service, which is setting up, I think, at the beginning of next year, which is an API service allowing real-time access to bus timetables and locations to help kind of inform what we can build on as new services and new digital kind of visibility over how our systems are managed, and how transport and our commute can go back to normal or go back to something that is appropriate for our new ways of working. The second theme I think I'd pick up on is this concept of we see an opportunity here for innovation. There is clearly in this accelerated landscape where we're all remote and, like Andy mentioned, kind of leveraging some of the tools we already knew we had but weren't leaning on in the same way. Actually, a real opportunity to innovate and look at new ways of working with different companies. The Minister mentioned kind of opportunities to work with SMEs. I think there is real opportunity here to leverage some of the amazing kind of technologies and amazing ideas that some of the SME environment have, working together with business and with local authorities to build more of an ecosystem approach to how we can manage our future transport systems, because it does affect all of us and we all have some great ideas. So, I mean, and as an example there, we're working with Oxfordshire County Council. They've performed a new procurement for the UK never seen by a local authority to build a kind of more demand responsive transport model. And so looking at new ways for small business to work with local authorities, I think is going to be a really interesting opportunity and a really interesting kind of next step. But in terms of that utopia of what we see as future smart cities being, from an Alchera perspective, we really think that taking a data-driven approach and leveraging some of these existing data sources, making them more consumable, making them more usable in real time, is only going to accelerate and enable us to provide those better services and provide a place that can be more dynamic and be more responsive to what we need it to be in this ever-changing and slightly more uncertain time.
Thank you. That was very, very interesting. I hope it was for the audience as well. I kept some notes while you were speaking. I mean, I could probably repeat a lot of the things you said, but I will keep that. It's the first time that AI is put to the test and a large-scale test that we haven't seen before in the history of humanity, probably. We should probably invest a lot more on public data sets. They make a huge difference to small companies that are trying to solve problems. And as the Minister said earlier, we need a change of mindset internally before we go outwards and give people data. And another thing that I found really interesting from all the answers you gave is the fact that data is changing all the time. We were monitoring commuting a few weeks ago based on how many trips we are doing on the tube, but now we are measuring the same phenomenon by using how many deliveries we had in specific parts of the city. I have a question from the audience. They are asking whether there are cities outside Europe that you feel are good models to follow so that the European cities become smarter. So does anybody want to comment on this, answer this? Maybe the Minister.
Well, I can say that one of the inspirations that we had for our startup program that we are launching soon was from Startup in Residence in San Francisco, where they bring startups into their organization and work with them in a partnership, and then they decide after some time whether or not to go further with the idea or not, and it's about solving real challenges for real people in the city. So that's a model of working, at least, which I think is interesting. Just adding on what Anna said, I think for me, innovation is not really about technology. It's about three things. It's about culture, it's about leadership, and it's about competence. It's about building a culture for innovation, a culture where you allow your people to think outside the box and to take chances, but also allow them to fail, which I think is crucial. Because at least in the public sector, fail fast is not a recipe that we use, because we stand, of course, responsible to the taxpayers. So we don't want to fail at all. But that means that we don't take any risks at all either. So I think allowing ourselves to fail is important, and having leaders who do that is important. But also we need, of course, the competence to follow through, the skill sets, if you want, to follow through on innovations. And that, I think, is lacking. When I talked to one of Norway's biggest banks the other day, I learned that 50% of their new employees were not bankers. They were actually technology people. So they're turning from being a bank to becoming a technology company. And where does that leave the public sector? how can we develop our skill sets and the people that work in the public sector who are brilliant at what they do, but in the face of new opportunities, we need to sort of rise to the challenge. We can't do that alone. So cooperation with the private sector is going to be key, both small startups, but also the big companies, I think.
Fotis, do you mind if I just come in on that question?
Yeah, I can confirm, by the way, that the internet in Birmingham is amazing before you do that.
Yeah, not in London though. Okay, so just let me, I may be wrong in what I'm about to say, but there's no problem in just chancing your arm. I don't sit here saying there's a city outside Europe that's really cracked this. There are lots of brilliant examples of individual things being done in quote unquote smart cities. And I take my hat off. But what I don't think we've seen yet, and I think the real prize is still to come, is all of this technology being used to address a really critical underlying issue. And the big issue facing all of Britain's cities is and central government is how on earth do we pay for the services that citizens want to have. And expectations keep rising. And of course, as we know, now we've got an absolute crisis in public funding. And of course, the biggest issue all within that is health. So the sweet spot that we really want to get to in terms of using data and then using the technology is in this predictive health treatment. And what we think we've got in the West Midlands is, of course, a population where the diversity represents the whole world. So we actually have the health features that go with every type of population. We have the NHS, which holds the data in a way in which lots of countries in the world do not. And we now have the technology coming as well. So our intention is to get to what we call a preventative health system by being able to anticipate the diagnostics that are coming. Now, it's an easy thing to say, but it's a very big idea. And if we can glue the components together to do that, we'll be achieving something that genuinely is transformative in this arena. And that's the goal. And that, again, is why we had to win the 5G bid.
So is there a new business model as well? Because you mentioned the way you're gonna, maybe you can elaborate a bit further on how are you thinking of asking taxpayers to pay for access to the services? Is that something that you guys are working on already?
Well, in a sense, we're not. There are already new models. If you think of Babylon Health, that is a new business model that's doing incredibly well, and of course, is in partnership with our NHS hospitals in parts of the West Midlands. So I'm not. That wasn't where I was. I'm actually about this is about the sustainability and the performance of the health service. Actually, now there are legion of new business opportunities. As has just been said, there's an incredible startup culture that comes around the edges of this, but the heart of this is the sustainability of the funding for the NHS.
Stefan, from your clientele, is there a city or a borough or any small place on earth that we feel that is doing a good job and it's worth talking about it?
So I agree with Andy's point. No one's kind of cracked an end-to-end smart city, as it were. Where I would point to, with significant caveats about the nature of the democracy there, is Singapore. So I've done some work with the planning department there, where they treat data as a kind of public asset. Where all their planning applications are kind of data rich, where there is an open map of in huge detail of the whole city, which has been, or the city state rather, which has been central in enabling them to organise many of their COVID responses. As I say, it comes with a caveat around people's trust and the nature of the democracy there, but actually having a more systematic approach to the how we digitally represent our cities, the services in them, and how the different government departments work around that digital representation of the city, I think is really important. And to that end, and it is a European example, I'm very impressed with Helsinki's approach to having an open 3D city model and other open kind of infrastructure that allows others to build on it. But I think, again, that comes with the caveat around what is the new relationship between cities and some of those that provide the smart services on top of them. The trouble sometimes is that certainly from a London context, the anecdote that's often used is about open data, is where Transport for London released all of their data, and that allowed Citymapper to thrive. And many of the accountancy around open data is, I think, a bit off beam sometimes. So the cost of producing data about a city itself is very low, but actually producing that infrastructure required hundreds of years and billions of pounds of investment. So we need to think about new business models and operating models that allow public institutions to open up their data, but also to receive benefits as well, so that they are sustainable from a funding perspective. And again, I have seen very few examples of that relationship so far, but I think going forward, that's going to be ever more important, where the public sector provides that public digital infrastructure, then has relationships with certain service providers that allow that public digital infrastructure and the real physical infrastructure to be maintained and supported in the future.
I think can you hear me? Yes, brilliant. Sorry. So, I mean, if I just put in my 2 cents, I think, Minister, I couldn't agree more with the kind of those 3 conditions you gave for innovation, and I think that that's a lesson that is slowly being learned across the sector of the mindset shift that's required to actually allow some of these changes to take place, and being more comfortable with failure and being able to kind of learn quickly is so important, and something which is quite new, I think, to the mindset of much of the kind of older ways of working. And certainly in the transport sector, the concept of failing is not one that's easily stomached. I mean, we're talking about about quite like mission critical infrastructure, or kind of where taking the wrong risk is actually putting people's lives at risk. So I think that finding the right balance between what can you test off road, what can you test in digital environments. We have so many opportunities to try and explore that. So I think that there is real opportunity there. When it comes to the question around looking internationally, I think Stefan and Andy both mentioned that the kind of need for this new perspective on business models. Business models that keep some of this new technologies alive, and allowing the public sector to access new technologies, and perhaps even generate revenue from owning data sets, sharing data sets, or encouraging and enabling economic growth from making those data sets open. I think that there is not an easy answer or not a straight answer to that. But for Alchera, we're very proud to be able to say that we've just been accepted as one of the startups on the first ever cohort of the Department for International Trade's Tech Export Academy, which is a program where we'll be kind of meeting and greeting with a lot of cities around APAC, the Asia Pacific region. And so Singapore's been mentioned. I've had the opportunity to go and speak with the LTA there, the SMRT, and they are doing fantastic things in terms of how they're using digital and data for public transport and beyond. And so I think it's all about having open ears and being able to look and share those ideas across different countries and different cities that I think will help us try and nail down what those business models look like, and what those innovation opportunities that can be successful can be, and learn from each other's failures as well through the process.
Very interesting. Okay, that was perfect timing, I guess. Thank you all for being here with us today. Thank you, Minister, Mr. Mayor, Anna, Stefan. Thank you for joining us. I hope the audience enjoyed it. And hopefully have some useful conclusions for a new era of urban governance.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Fotis.